Hi, good morning. I'm delighted to introduce to you today Dr. Mike Jones, the Managing Director of Impact Minerals, with the ticker code IPT, India Papa Tango. So a standout project we're going to discuss today is the Lake Hope High Purity Alumina project in Western Australia. And if you actually hear of the term HPA, this is exactly what we are talking about. And now, just for listeners to have an understanding about Dr. Mike Jones' history, is that he is a geologist. He graduated from the Imperial College in London, moved to WA in 1988, and has worked on over 80 projects across the world. Welcome, Dr. Mike Jones. How are you?
I'm great, Gina, and fantastic to be here. My inaugural video for you guys.
Oh, wonderful. Look, I've seen some presentations of you. You're spectacular. I'm very excited to see this in person myself. So Mike, what I'm going to do here is we've prepared some slides and we want to go through this with you. So first and foremost, could you start off by telling us a little bit about Impact Minerals?
Certainly. I'm the founding managing director of Impact Minerals. We put the company together way back in 2006. And since that time, we've spent all of our time up until the last 12 months exploring for what I like to call a world-class deposit. Now, those words are often bandied around, but what I've learned over the years is that trying to do anything but develop a world-class ore body is actually a waste of anybody's time, in particular investors. And we just see it over and over again. Too many companies trying to develop mines that are too small. So we always set out from the start to find something very big, but they are far apart. They're difficult to find. But if we look at examples like Azure Minerals, Chalice mining, and also De Grey, then we see that when we find those big deposits, we get a massive growth in market cap, say up to $1 billion, and we haven't even turned a sod of earth just yet. So that was really what we set Impact Minerals up for, and we believe that our project that we're currently working on will give us that pathway. So.
Excellent. So for people who actually haven't ever heard of HPA, which is high purity alumina, can you please tell the listeners about this commodity and its actual applications?
Certainly. High purity alumina, or HPA, is actually a niche mineral, but it plays a very important part in the ongoing energy transition that we're all going through. And it's actually an aluminium oxide. It occurs in various forms. So people who are into minerals, it's corundum or sapphire. It's very hard, it's thermally inert and chemically inert. And so it has two particular main uses right now. So the first one is many of your viewers might have remembered that the Samsung phones were exploding a few years ago. And of course, recently we've seen the Tesla fires where the batteries catch on fire. It takes about 6 hours to put them out. And that's because HPA acts to stop the thermal runaway in lithium-ion batteries. So with the chemistry between the two ends of the battery, the cathode and the anode, it creates heat. That heat needs to be kept under control. And so they use the HPA in those batteries to keep that definitely stop them from exploding. And that's obviously a key use. The second one is, interestingly, is in LEDs. Might sound a little bit boring, but most of the lights that are being produced nowadays have got HPA in them, and most people might be looking at their smart screens, so OLEDs, ULEDs that are produced by Samsung and LG and the like. And of course, we're seeing increasing number of buildings around the world that's being converted into massive LED screens, and so huge demand, in particular in that particular field. So there are minor uses. So we see sapphire glass in your smartphones, smartwatches, et cetera, and also increasingly in semiconductors, proper semiconductors. And we're seeing a big increase in the demand for those as we see the AI revolution, going on. So it's definitely a product for the future.
Thank you actually for really distilling it and coming exactly into the practical uses for our viewers, as I said, because I think a lot of these minerals here, they're so bespoke that we often didn't even learn about it in the periodic table when I was in university and in high school. So please continue, Dr. Mike.
Yeah, so it's as I mentioned, it's a niche product, and but it sells for very high prices. So if we look at the current market prices today, then the price that we can charge for the product actually depends on the purity. So it's called the high purity alumina because it's 99.99% pure, which means that it's got a very, very small amount of other impurities in it. It's actually very difficult to get a super pure material in the real world. And so the purer it is, the higher the price. And so if we look at the table here, we've got some current market prices in through here. And the benchmark price that we use is 4N, 4 nines, 99.99%. So there's a significant market there. And then also in the 3N space, so not quite as pure, but there's some very good prices you can achieve there. But the real high margin business is up in 5N and maybe even the 6N area where it's extremely pure and you can demand extremely high prices per ton of HPA. I will say, though, that those markets are actually relatively small volume wise. And so for Impact, we're very much focused on getting into the bulk market in the 3N and the 4N space. And so it's, as you can see from the numbers here, it's definitely a high margin and high demand business as we go over the next 10 years or so.
Excellent. We're going to get into production costs very shortly. But for now, so your flagship project, the Lake Hope High Purity Alumina project, is actually in WA. Can you tell us a little bit more about this project?
Yes, look, it's called Lake Hope, and it's actually a system of what we call salt lakes or player lakes here in Western Australia. And for anyone who's driven through Australia or any other desert parts of the world, you often come across these salt pans, which are the result of evaporation. So rain is coming in, it's mixing with material that washes into these lakes, and it evaporates. And in our particular case, it's left a unique set of minerals in these two lakes, West Lake and East Lake, that we can see here. And that is where our alumina sits. It's right at surface, and there's a lot of natural advantages to that, which we're going to discuss. But one of the big advantages we can see straight away here is that there's actually a road that goes right up to the side of the lake. And that's that line that we can see running from top left to bottom right through the slide there. And that's basically will probably be our haul road when we take material out. So we don't even need to do any significant clearing to get to the deposit, which is basically in the middle of nowhere. It's a long way from any town. So this is a great natural advantage that exists for this deposit. And it's located about 500 kilometres east of Perth here in Western Australia. And for people that don't know, Western Australia would have to be the top destination to work in mining anywhere in the world. It's well understood. The process of getting approvals is fairly straightforward, and it is a great place to be. So we can see here that this is now a picture of one of the lakes, and we actually like to call it the Magic Lake, and that's not just because of how it looks at certain times of the day and certain times of the year. It is a very pretty area. In the top 2 meters of that lake lies something in the order of between 15 and 20 billion US dollars worth of HPA, if we can dig it out and convert it, just in the top 2 meters, sitting right there at surface. So we've already kind of drilled this deposit out. We know the rough size of it, and it contains about 880,000 tons of alumina in its raw form. Obviously, we've got to take that and convert it into HPA, which we will talk about. But in its raw form, there's almost 1 million tons, basically, of material on those two lakes. And if you do the math, if it's selling at $20,000 a ton, that's where we get the 20 billion US dollars from. Now, we're only going to be mining 10,000 tons per annum, so it's not like we're going to dig up $20 billion worth of material overnight. But what that does give us is a 50-year mine life at least. So this is a long life mine on a high margin business, and those are two big ticks towards a world-class deposit.
So Mike, can you explain more in detail how Lake Hope Alumina deposit's distinctive nature can position Impact Minerals to become one of the lowest high purity alumina producers globally?
So we've seen the lake, and we've talked about the fact that the raw alumina is in the top 2 meters. So as you can imagine, the actual cost of mining is going to be relatively low, and we'll talk about that in a subsequent question. So that's a huge commercial advantage for us. And the second advantage is that the nature of the minerals that are in the ore at Lake Hope actually also go into solution very, very easily when we start to process the material. So those two things end up giving us an extremely low operating cost. That is the cost to produce 1 tonne of high purity alumina. And so that's very important because HPA is what we'd like to call a bulk commodity. And so along with things like graphite, mineral sands, rare earths, and even lithium, there's no shortage of these materials around the place. And there's many materials that you can use to make HPA. But in the case of a bulk commodity, as I like to say, one of 4 things has to be true. You either have to have the biggest deposit, or you have to have like the highest grade, or you have to have, say, you'd be first to market. And a good example of that is Australian company Pilbara Minerals Limited. Even though the lithium price has been down over the last 12 months or so, Pilbara very early on in the piece got established client relationships, and they basically sailed through the downturn. But the 4th one is that you have to be one of, if not the lowest cost producers of the bulk. And so when I first saw this deposit, I knew almost instinctively that it was going to be one of the lowest cost producers. But our recent work has shown it'll be the lowest cost producer, as far as we know, by a very significant margin of 30 to 40% below anybody else that we know of in the world. And part of the reason for that is that the incumbent producers are the Chinese and the Japanese, and they produce their HPA basically from aluminium metal. And that aluminium metal has been mined previously as bauxite. It's gone through a very environmentally unfriendly and energy-intensive process to get to aluminium metal, which then subsequently gets refined into HPA. And so their operating cost is up in the order of $15,000 to $20,000 US per tonne. Whereas we believe that we can produce ours for $4,000 a tonne. And as you can see, that's a world-class margin below anybody else. And that gives us a huge commercial advantage going forward.
Thanks. And Mike, could you please explain to us at the moment here something that really caught my eye when I was reviewing Impact Minerals myself, that you state that it currently has a net present value of $1.3 billion. Can you explain to me how you came to this number and what net present value truly means for our viewers?
Certainly. So when you're putting together a mine, one of the key objective is obviously to make money for shareholders. And the way that we do that is we run financial models on the capital expenditure required to get the mine up and running, and then how much it costs to run the mine and what dollar we're going to get back from the product that we're going to sell. Okay, and you can run those models on the computer and take it out over the life of mine. So in our case, we've taken a 25-year timeline and we've worked out theoretically how much money we might be able to make in that particular time. And then what economists what economists do is then discount that basically for inflation, to simplify it, back to what the project would be worth today. If someone came up to me and said, I want to buy that deposit off you, what's it worth? I would say it's worth 1.3 billion Australian dollars. So give me that check and we'll walk away. So, and I think a lot of people don't really understand what that actually means. And so as a result, there's a big gap between where our market capitalization is and what the value of the project is. Now, that's a case for many companies, so we're perhaps no different there, but we believe that we've got a very clear path to drive the value up to $1.3 billion. And that's where I talk about, there's a massive upside to the Impact share price. And that is going to be greatly driven by the fact that we will be, one of, if not the lowest cost producers of HPA globally. That is our USP, our unique selling proposition, and I think will open the doors for us going forward. So we can look at that value proposition in a little bit more detail.
Yes.
There's a graph here of our share price since we released the scoping study. So we were sort of trundling along at about 1 cent. At about that time, we released the study. There was a lot of interest, as we can see. There was a big increase, and obviously late last year and the start of this year, there hasn't been the greatest of times for the junior resources sector. There's been a bit of a turnaround the last few weeks, of course, with the gold and copper, but until then, it had been quite a depressed time. But look, in that time, our actual share price went up significantly, 40 to 50% increase, and our market cap is actually a very healthy $40 million. So, going forward, it's not like we're doing a capital raise at very low market caps and, getting heavy dilution. So if our current value of the company is 40 million and we have a project that's worth $1.3 billion, then there's obviously huge upside. And in this case, as you can see here, it's about 33 times at the moment. So 30 times the value. And that's what, we hope investors can look forward to making over the next, say, 2 to 5 years as we get this project underway. And we also get an understanding in the marketplace. As we've said, HPA is not sort of widely known or widely understood, but I knew from the start that this was going to be an education process and it was going to be a slow burn. It wasn't going to be an overnight success like those billion-dollar companies I talked about, De Grey, Chalice, and Azure, with a few drill holes, boom, it's all off. This is going to be a slow burn as we tick off all of the milestones, going forward. But I believe that that's the kind of return that we can get going forward.
I mean, you've worked across 80 projects here, Mike, so I'm sure you've seen some spectacular stories, which we'll get into very shortly about your history. So thank you. So Mike, I'm now going to slick it forward back to the 4 pillars. So the next one here is, you see, global projections are for HPA markets actually growing significantly in the next few years, potentially surpassing supply by 2026. That's really just around the corner. Can you explain to our audience what are the likely drivers behind this rapid market growth and what this actually means for Impact Minerals?
Yeah, so the slide that we can see now looks at the forecast supply and demand from here on 2024 up to 2030. The figures prior to 24 are historical, so they're accurate. And we're looking at a market for HPA that is growing at an annual rate of about 20% per annum. And so, that means that, within the next, 3 to 4 years, the market's going to double and then double again. So we're going to see very rapid growth. And the two main drivers for that, as we see here in the dark blue color, we're seeing the demand for LEDs. And that's obviously, as I mentioned, is a big area of growth. And then also as the separators in the lithium ion batteries, and as we move towards decarbonation and electrification around the world, then that growth should continue. And so what that leads to is that around about 2026, 27, there's possibly going to be a tightening of supply, maybe a supply deficit. And prices from independent reviewers have indicated that the price that we quoted previously might jump even higher at around about that time. And part of that is driven also by the fact that a lot of current production comes from the Chinese, and with the offshoring and friendshoring that's going on, and the critical minerals. I did forget to mention that HPA is a critical mineral. It's listed on Australia's list, Europe's list, and America's list of critical minerals. And so there's definitely moves towards securing supply chains in that particular mineral. So we believe that by around about 26, 27, the Chinese supply will drop off, and that opens up big markets for us in Europe and the US. So we're going to be hopefully positioned perfectly for that time.
I mean, anything at this present point that is decoupling, I guess, too much dependence on China is actually a good sign for mining, right?
It is indeed, in particular in niche metals like alumina, graphite, and rare earths. Rare earths obviously been in the stories a lot in the last 12 months. China's well known for having, almost a monopoly on supply, and that's definitely one area that people want to secure supply. And it'll be the same, as I say, in the other minerals, and in particular, HPA. So it's in that case, it is a good place to be.
Excellent. So can you explain a little bit more to our viewers what we're actually looking at here?
So on the left here, we see Roland Gotthard. He actually discovered the deposit. We are in a joint venture. We're earning 80% of that project. And this, amazingly, is actually how we drilled out the $20 billion US worth of material with a rubber mallet and a plastic push tube. So we basically just hammer the tube into the mud, and this is what it comes out looking like. You can see it there, and it's basically like plasticine, and it falls apart relatively easily into your hands. And what's interesting is that the majority of that material is actually less than a few microns in size. Like, it's mostly nanometer scale particles, so you can't even see them with the naked eye. You need a scanning electron microscope to actually identify the minerals that are in there. And that's very important because it means that we don't need to beneficiate it on site. We don't need to crush it or grind it or do any of those sort of things. And it also reacts very quickly when we drop it into the liquids to start the process to convert it to HPA. So it is a remarkable ore body in that respect.
Thank you. So we're moving on to the discussion around, you already said, the low-cost mining, and you've already demonstrated to us the glamorous side of mining. Could you elaborate a little bit more about the low-cost side and the high margin, how this applies to Impact Minerals?
Of course. So if you compare just digging up dirt, basically it's just going to be a small quarry operation, and you compare that to your standard mining process where you've got to drill, you've got to blast, you've got to crush it, grind it, and then process it. There's none of that for Lake Hope. We're basically just going to dig it up, store it on the side of the lake for a short period of time, and then truck it off site. And we will build the process plant in a town somewhere in Western Australia, most likely Perth or Bunbury. And so that means that on site, the actual operating costs for digging and transport are very low, only 5% of the overall operating cost of the project, which is basically minimal compared to any other mining operation. But very importantly, it also means that we'll have a very limited environmental risk. And in terms of long-term rehabilitation of the area and rehab risk going forward, that's going to be minimal, because basically we're going to leave a hole in the lake that's only about 1 metre deep over most of it, and it will fill in because this deposit is actually still forming today, and so it's almost like it's the ultimate renewable resource. And so within a very short period of time, you won't even know that the mine had been there. So that's a huge cost advantage for us going forward.
Thank you. So, Mike, can you please tell us about the ongoing feasibility study and what we can expect to hear next from Impact Minerals?
So the scoping study that we've already spoken about that was out in November is really a first look at the economics of the project and things like what the mining costs would be, where we're going to build the plant, et cetera, et cetera. And so a pre-feasibility study is basically almost a repeat of that, but in more detail to give us a better handle on the costs. And also to start pinning down some of the possible alternative routes that we have in the whole mine to market process. So there are 4 pillars to the pre-feasibility study at the moment. The first one is metallurgical test work. That's what it's all about in terms of making sure that our process will produce high purity alumina to the standard of chemical purity and physical specifications needed by the plant. Fairly straightforward. So there's a couple of process routes that we have, and we are working through both of those to work out which one will be the one going forward. But we should think that by the middle of this year, June, July, we'll have made that decision, and then we'll have a very clear path then, going forward. So that's a huge part. So you'll be hearing more about that metallurgical test work. The second one is actually getting the mining approvals process going. We do need to lodge a mining lease application, and that has its own set of statutory approvals and statutory processes that we have to go through. Interestingly, we've already received heritage clearance from the Native Title Group as part of that process. So there are no impediments to mining on the lake. We will still have to come up with an agreement, mining agreement with the Ngaju people, which will involve jobs, our contribution to their community, et cetera, and we look forward to working with them over the next 12 to 18 months. And then also the environmental approvals, and we have just received our baseline studies, and again, no significant impediments on the lake, which is another fantastic tick. So we see that the approval of the mining lease should be a relatively straightforward and relatively fast process. So that's an exciting development for us. The third one is actually where we're going to build the process plant. So the fact that we can mine and truck at such cheap costs indicates we have a lot of alternative areas that we could possibly put the plant. A lot of that will be driven by what grants might be available from the government. Because HPA is a critical mineral, there is a lot of funding, available. It's competitive funding. We have to apply for grants, etc. So no guarantee, but that might be a significant input into where we build the plant. It'll likely be closer to the coast, somewhere in Perth, maybe Bunbury, or even Collie, which is well known now for its increasing industry to replace the coal mine and the coal-fired power station, which are being put out of business over the next 5-6 years. And then finally, in the back end of this year, it's all about product marketing. So in the HPA space, it's very important that we look to get offtake agreements. It's not traded on the open market. You need to provide a product that's of the right quality and nature that the client wants, and we'll be in a position to start doing that in the back end of this year. And so that's going to be a massive tick. So all of that wrapped up should mean that we should finish the pre-feasibility study in the last quarter of this year, and that will trigger then Impact becoming an 80% owner in the project, and then it's a quick ride then into, again, definitive feasibility studies going forward.
So we expect September to see some significant movements from Impact?
Yes, so look, mining lease application will be lodged shortly. We'll have news out about the environmental work. There's a lot of exciting work on the metallurgical test work, because we believe that will actually offer significant capital reductions in the capital expenditure required to build the big plant, and also the possibly even lower operating costs, although we're still working on that at the moment, if you can believe that. So huge news to come there. And I think also people will start to see that this is a serious story with serious players in the business, and there's a very good chance that we're going to hit our targets over the next few years.
Well, I'm excited because in terms of this time scale from exploration through to, you said, product marketing, we've really come into the right time speaking with you at the most exciting part of the journey and the story. That's brilliant. So Mike, for our viewers, okay, I want to talk to you about the Alpha HPA Journey, ticker code A4 Nelly. So this is a really important story here. Can you please tell our viewers what are we looking at here and why this is such an important piece of information to pay attention to?
It is. We're very fortunate that another company in the HPA space, Alpha HPA, has sort of gone along this path before us. And people who do their research on HPA companies, you'll find that there's been quite a few players over the years that have sort of tried and actually failed to get the HPA going, because technically it is a very difficult thing to do, and to get those kind of purities. And our advantage is that we have primary material in the lake, which is actually relatively pure to begin with, and that makes the whole job a whole lot easier. So 5 years ago, Alpha HPA were a junior explorer just like Impact, and they came across a process to produce HPA from clay, from nickel laterites, believe it or not, but very quickly established that they could use the same process using a chemical feedstock that they get from Orica and also from Rio Tinto. So they're actually not mining. So a bit like us. I mean, we're almost not mining, we're quarrying. And so Alpha is the same. They use a chemical feedstock, but their process method is actually quite expensive. So in the previous graph showing the costs of production per ton, theirs is probably, say, 50 to 100% higher than ours, because their particular process is quite expensive. It does give them the ability to make some very niche markets. But what's happened over the last 5 years is that they've ticked off their milestones. People have liked the story. And so their market capitalization has gone from, say, about 20 million in January 2019 to currently, as we look at this graph's a little bit out of date, but basically $1 billion. And that's actually the NPV that was given to their project in 2020 when they produced their feasibility study. So lo and behold, a few years later, they've reached $1 billion. And that's why I believe that if we follow in their footsteps, we will have different markets to them and different niches. That's we're not trying to replicate what they have done, but here's proof that if you get it right in the HPA space, this is a big driver of value over the next few years.
So in a way, how do you see this being slightly different for the Impact Minerals journey in the 3 to 4 year time frame?
Well, we're hoping to accelerate it. Maybe 2 to 4 years. Some of the other players in the space, I won't name them. People can look them up. They're just about starting to build their pilot plants after between 2 and 7 years of development. Okay, so we've been in the game only 12 months, and we will start our pilot plant probably, by the end of this year. And so, we're playing catch up in terms of the other players, but I believe that our process, because it's so much more straightforward than anybody else, we will actually, we're going to be out there. We'll be one of the leaders in terms of the next to market in the HPA space. So it's again all driven by the unique nature of the Lake Hope deposit.
That's tremendous. So you're expecting to accelerate this, plus our journey is getting very exciting. So probably within the next 30 months, we're going to see some significant movement. So, Mike, the next one is we always love looking at the history and experience of the senior management team. And particularly yours caught my eye because you've spent the last 30 years also as a geologist. Could you explain to us a little bit about your experience and your background for our viewers?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I studied in England at Imperial College, the Royal School of Mines there, did both my degrees there, including my PhD, and then came to Western Australia in 1988. And I worked for a company called Western Mining Corporation, which your older viewers would remember. And that was a very much a mid-tier, very successful exploration and mining company. It was well known as a great training ground for exploration geologists. And they'd had numerous successes over the years, of which the standout is Olympic Dam, which BHP own now. And that's why they took over Western Mining for the prize of OD. And so I was very fortunate there to be in their project generation team. And, we were set the task of looking for gold and nickel deposits here in Western Australia. And then subsequent to that, I worked for a number of consulting companies, basically also drawing boxes on maps where we might go and find new gold deposits or new nickel deposits, and then started my own consultancy with a business partner, and then we together then put Impact Minerals on the ASX back in 2006. So yes, I've looked at a lot of projects, and I've also got a background in understanding what the characteristics are of world-class deposits. So in standard gold or copper or nickel deposit, there are certain, rocks that you look for, certain deep-seated structures you look for, et cetera, et cetera. So I've always had my eye on those prizes. And so when Lake Hope appeared, it was a bit of a left-hand turn, if you like, because it was all in the top 2 meters of the lake. Didn't need any fancy geological thinking. It was all it's going to require is 5 men, a truck, and a loader, and we're off to market. So that's really that made me take the decision. It was a big sideways step for Impact to get into this project, and that's all driven by my view of how good the actual Lake Hope deposit is. We've got Roland Gotthard. He discovered the deposit. He's on board as the project manager. We have feasibility study manager on board now, and he did the feasibility studies for De Grosser for Sandfire and also for Nova Bollinger for Sirius, two famous discoveries that are well known for having the two shortest track records from discovery to mining in the market over the last 20 years. And so we got David English on board to help drive towards development in that time frame. So it's a very good team we're putting together.
And just a little bit more about this team that you're working with as well. So have you worked closely with these teams in previous projects, or at least through your industry have been acquainted with them?
No, I'd known Roland, who brought the project to us, from a farm. We'd crossed paths, a couple of times, and it always impressed me, the lateral thinker. And there's a lot of lateral thinking went into finding Lake Hope. And it's an interesting story in a way, because we actually found the deposit on LinkedIn. And so we'd been following Roland and his activities. And the way Roland found this thing was that basically he realized people were having trouble making HPA out of all these other different routes, thought about what minerals alumina could form in, found some of that material, came up with the process, and then went out and found the deposit. So normally you find the deposit and work out how to get it out of the ground, but he went back to front. And I will say a lot of the experiments that he was showing on LinkedIn were on his kitchen bench. So I know his wife was very grateful when we got into the joint venture, because then we could take those experiments off the kitchen bench and into the laboratory. So that's a very interesting story for you in terms of how you discover world-class deposits in there. So there's Roland. Yeah.
I was just saying, all great stories have a great, right?
They certainly do. They certainly do. And look, we've got a very experienced board in terms of a chairman who's got a very strong background in the finance industry, and we have two other geologists on board. Look, we will need other skills after the pre-feasibility study, and to help us get through, building the mine, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll assess that as we go along. And look, I've always wanted to build a mine, but I'm also very conscious of the limitations of my skills and abilities. And so, if we get to a point where, I feel that I'm not the appropriate guy to keep pushing it forward, then, happy to hand the reins over. So, but, I'll keep going until I feel that I can't, because as I say, I've always wanted to build a mine. It's a fascinating challenge. I've really enjoyed it over the last 12 months. It's a whole new set of skills and interactions that we need to do. And I'm particularly looking forward to dealing with the Naju people, the native title group. We'll be spending a lot of time in Norseman meeting the families there and negotiating the mining agreement, and see if we can make an impact, if you'll excuse the pun, in the Norseman community. So so far it's been a great journey for me.
Fantastic. So, Mike, to sum this up, what would you like to say to our community of investors who are actually looking to either diversify, reposition, or rebalance their portfolio into the HPA sector?
So there's not a great choice of HPA wannabes on the ASX, and we are certainly, in my view, the standout. And that's because we aim to be one of the lowest cost producers globally because of the unique nature of Lake Hope, the minerals that are in it, and the ease of which is processing. We're in Western Australia. It's a tier 1 jurisdiction. It's the best place to be working anywhere in the world in terms of the mining industry. And the low cost of production, is driven as much by the metallurgical processing, and that's a big focus for us at the moment going forward. And we should be getting some very exciting results out of that. And so we're building our skills in metallurgical work, and also we'll build them out in terms of producing the final product that the client wants. That takes a lot of interaction between the client and adjusting our product as we move forward. And that's a big skill that we'll be building out later this year. And look, over the next 2 to 3 years, we might get that 30 times uplift. And if we do get it right, then that's when the supply deficit will be there in 2026, 27. And we might have the timing right. And hopefully a market cap at many multiples of where we are right now.
Tremendous. Thank you so much. And I just want to recap that this is high volume, low cost, high margin, and the net present value is $1.3 billion. And we've also had some historical evidence from the other players in the market where they went from smaller than your size, and in the short space of 4 to 5 years, that they're now a $1 billion market cap business. So what I'm going to do here is I really want to sum it up for our viewers that if you want to put this stock either on your watch list or look at investing, we've actually put together a report on Impact Minerals. It's quite comprehensive as always. You will see that our target price from our analysts is about 2.1 to 2.7 cents, and it's actually currently trading at only 1.4 cents. So there is still a significant upside. So I invite you all to either read this report by either downloading it directly from our website or simply clicking the link on this email below. So thank you so much for your time today, Mike. I just want to make one more mention because all my viewers know I'm a WA girl, but you did move to Perth in 1988 in the wild, wild west. Just really quickly, how has Perth changed for you?
Well, when I first arrived, I'd been living in London for 7 years and turned up here and the capital city, and discovered that the whole of the shopping centres in the centre of Perth closed at 1 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, and they rostered the petrol stations, so you couldn't get petrol at the same station during the weekend. All government mandated, but no, it's been a fantastic place. It's grown hugely. It's the centre of mining in Australia, and you couldn't want to be in a better place. And I've loved living here. It's been really good.
Thank you so much, Mike. Wishing you all the best for 2024. I will be watching this code very closely.
That's great, Jenna. Thanks very much.
Thank you.